issues that maybe it would be great if you could comment are, for instance, it sounded as if in Mexico, the choice of a MPI came very much as, it was almost an endogenous process. I mean, you guys were already asking this question when the methodology came, which is great, which also meant that you guys already had a certain level of maturity and institutional capacity in order to be asking those questions. So, which might not be the case in every single place. I mean, one of the issues that I see as a requirement for the use of MPIs on policymaking might be programs with very clear log frames, right? Because if the programs and the sectors are not asking these questions, it's very hard to actually try to match the programs that you have with these multidimensional indexes that have clarity of, you know, different sectors and different objectives beyond consumption or monetary income. So it would be nice if you could maybe react to that. Another issue that I was thinking was also the consensus building aspect of it, because you also showed what can happen when Congress builds this with this consensus, right? I mean, luckily in Mexico, there was only one out of the 6 indicators that was very hard for you to materialize. I mean, it might be that in some of our, if you leave it, you know, it might be that all 6 indicators might be completely unrealistic. And if that's the case, then, you know, what exactly is the use of it? So, because, you know, might be left with a situation that it's not just the issue of social cohesion that you're going to have the problem, but you're going to have the problem with every single one that Congress might choose as their domain. So it would be nice also to, I don't know what level of backstage and technical advice Congress received in order to guide them on this process, right? Okay.
Tara.
So thank you.
The one short question has to do with what Rinku said. You know, you talked a lot about measurement and monitoring. So what kind of surveys are being conducted with such a frequency every couple of years? But the other question I have is about Progressar Oportunidad, which is, you know that there was a targeting, sort of they developed it slowly over time, right? And now I thought you said that you're going to be targeting programs using this multidimensional approach. Have you looked into what that means in terms of what is the overlap between whatever change has occurred here vis-a-vis the old? And then just from limited experience, I know changing these things are not politically palpable. So if your new index implies certain people aren't poor and should be out and in, I mean, these are very, very difficult for countries to manage. So how are you going through this process? I mean, absent the fact that there's a law that says this should be done, I mean, I'm just wondering how you're trying to do this. Thanks.
Ruslan Nemtsov from the HD Anchor. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. My question is also following up on the targeting question. In one of your slides, you demonstrated results of the simulations, how the poverty would look like in different dimensions if everybody will have access to universal health insurance coverage. But one tends to notice on this illustration, and that was the same with the slide that Sabine presented this morning, is that almost 80% of population, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but almost 80% is poor in some sense. They are either income poor, but not necessarily poor in other dimensions, or they are not income poor, but poor in other respects. And that poses a question of eligibility for targeting. So if we really caring about covering all of the potential problems or vulnerabilities, we may end up having a majority of the population who needs to be targeted. With the limited resources, it's difficult to make a proper choice. How you address this tension that, in effect, more people are becoming eligible?
First round, and then we can try and go around for a second round.
As I said, I want to present you to Ricardo Aparicio who will be getting, and then I'll be back. Ricardo it was a good presentation they made of him. He was the person responsible of getting this exercise from the very beginning to the end. So he has a lot of merit in this process. I want to say this is not a paper written by Ricardo and myself. It's a whole CONEVAL working on it. However, we are like the speakers from CONEVAL. So I'm really glad that Ricardo is with us. He says something, and then I'll come back.
I will begin talking about the data system question. As Gonzalo said, the law says that we have to make these measurements at the state level every 2 years and the municipality level every 5 years. Then what we had to do is to combine in a single data set all the variables. And we had to work with the National Statistical Office in Mexico, INEGI, in order that all the variables are included in the income and expenditure survey. For the municipality estimates, what we have done is to incorporate the variables in the census, in the huge sample census, 10% of the data of the 2010 round. And we have to do it for the 2015 housing enumeration and population enumeration. Then, by fortune, INEGI has been very receptive to this issue, and they have incorporated all the variables, especially the food scale questions, which are quite subjective. They didn't want it to incorporate them because they are statistical official data sources, and they were very reluctant, but finally they did. And then, as it is now, I think we are in a position to make this operational every with the periodicity that the law says. As to the indicators definition and the conceptual building process, I think that most of the indicators that we have, it's one of the consequences of the data sources we are using. They should be easy to capture, to get in a census operational system. Then most of them were already in the data set. And these are primary enrollment, secondary education. These are not quite difficult to get. The problem is not that. The problem is what Sabina was talking about in the morning, the missing dimensions of poverty, not rather the question of what indicators we get, which are housing, education, income with the national income expenditure survey. And with respect to the overlap, I would like to point out the following. It is true that at an aggregated level, as Sabina and Maria Emma presented in the morning, there's a huge correlation. But there is not the same correlation at the individual data level. Actually, the correlation is quite low, as it always happens when we have huge, enormous data sources. Because people is in different stages of their life cycle. Then their necessities and their deprivations are not the same. And I think this is very important in order to consider the necessity of applying a multidimensional poverty measurement. Actually, for me, it's one of the strongest cases for advocating to a multidimensional poverty measurement, because people is in have different necessities. I would say that, and perhaps Gonzalo would like to answer the other questions.
Thank you, Ricardo. So just again, for the survey part, we have every 5 years a census for the municipalities, which is our data constraint, as I said, because we want this indicator to be decomposable by regions, and therefore we want to have the same questions for the municipalities and the states and the country. Therefore, our limits were the census. And that's why Ricardo said we were somehow fortunate to have more questions in the census than it used to be, thanks to the statistical office. So we have 5 years municipality and every 2 years as states and the country. And now, every quarter, this new tendency, which we call the labor poverty tendency, something like that, which we're trying to make sure that is not poverty because it doesn't comply with the law. It doesn't have health, it doesn't have education, it doesn't have social cohesion, but it does have two very important ingredients of almost every poverty measurement, which is income, labor income, and the cost of the food basket. And we do have that every quarter by nationwide and by state, which is very, very important. As you will see, unfortunately, we didn't bring it, but you will see that the crisis in Mexico hit more the northern states and hit more the urban states than the rural states, which makes sense. Those who were linked more with international markets were hit, and therefore we somehow solved the problem. The question is why CONEVAL has produces the information for poverty every 2 years with a delay of almost 8 months. Aren't you hiding something? Huh? Why is it that GDP is released every year or every 3 years with a delay of 3 months? And why inflation has a delay of 15 days? And why unemployment is a delay of 15 days? Why poverty, which is so important, has a delay of 2 years? So with this new indicator, we are somehow solving the problem of information gap, let's say, and we have the tendency. What may happen basically to income poverty? Well, that may happen to income poverty. It increased without any doubt in the recently. Joao, question about it is easier to link poverty with social programs if we already had a tool for planning better programs, which is a log frame. So if I understood correctly, that's true. We are now we are almost ready to link those parts because we worked on log frames 4 years ago. So working for 4 years ago, now we say, well, what is your objective? How's your, el fin? What is it? Well, it's increasing the access to health. Well, therefore, it goes directly to the poverty measurement because they've got access to health. Or some others may have the income approach. Well, if you have the income approach, well, you can measure that easily. But most of them, they don't have the income approach. That's the problem. About the consensus within Congress, of course, the cost is believing in what Congress people agreed, no matter what what was the agreement. That's the cost. We should live with social cohesion until perhaps next Congress erases it from. However, there is a benefit. There's a huge benefit of using what Congress agreed because then you can link that academic work to a public policy tool, which is very rich. So we can say, well, who determined the cutoffs? The law. Huh? So we have to use that because you determine. It's not that we, a bunch of academics, sat in the table and say, well, what do you think about the dimensions? What do you think about the cutoffs? Perhaps those cutoffs are more intelligently put or set. It doesn't matter, however. it matters more in this with this aspect what the law says, given that it makes sense, of course. But you have that